So let's start with the last lecture of this series of excretory system. Here we will cover renovascular diseases and renal neoplasms. So let's start with renovascular diseases. So these vessels of kidney, they can be involved in a variety of diseases which can be of primarily of renal origin, or they can be systemic diseases like vasculitis, hypertension and diabetes mellitus. So just the important ones amongst these. First is benign and malignant nephrosclerosis, which are the renal vascular lesions in different types of hypertension. Then renal artery stenosis. Then vascular involvement in thrombotic microangiopathies, for example TTP and HUS. Then also as a part of atherosclerotic ischemic disease. Then diffuse cortical necrosis and renal infarcts. So benign and malignant nephrosclerosis, this we had already discussed in our chapter on hypertension, but still because it is important, so we will quickly go through it in 3 or 4 slides again. Then thrombotic microangiopathies, these have been covered in hematology, so I will not be talking about these. Atherosclerosis also we have discussed in detail, so I'm going to skip it here. Then we will talk about diffuse cortical necrosis in just 3 or 4 lines. And finally, renal infarcts also we had discussed in our chapter on hemodynamics. So you would recall that these are white wedge-shaped infarcts where the tip of this wedge, it will be away from the renal surface and it will be pointing towards the feeding vessel. And because these renal infarcts, the arteries, they are end arteries, so that is why renal infarcts, they are white infarcts. So let's talk about these diffuse cortical necrosis in brief. This is an uncommon condition and it arises after some obstetric complication, usually, for example, abruptio placentae, septic shock, or extensive surgery. This is fatal in absence of supportive therapy and grossly, as the name suggests, cortical necrosis. So there will be large areas of necrosis of cortex of kidney, and microscopically these areas will correspond to areas of ischemic necrosis. Along with there will be presence of thrombi in glomeruli as well as vessels of kidney. Starting with nephrosclerosis, which is the term used for renal lesions of hypertension. These are further divided into benign nephrosclerosis, which is renal pathology which is associated with uncomplicated hypertension, and malignant nephrosclerosis, which are renal vascular changes which are associated with accelerated or malignant hypertension. So let's start with pathology of benign nephrosclerosis. Here we see two types of lesions. One is medial and intimal thickening, and second is hyaline deposition. So first is medial and intimal thickening. Here it is because of as a response to hemodynamic changes that occur in hypertension with added changes of aging and genetic defects. In addition to that, there is hyaline deposition in arterioles. This is deposition of hyaline pink homogeneous kind of material, and this is caused by extravasation of plasma proteins and deposition of basement membrane matrix material. So this is contributed by two things. One is extravasated plasma proteins and second one is basement membrane type material. Moving on to lesions of malignant nephrosclerosis, here we see fibrinoid necrosis, and secondly we see hyperplastic arteriosclerosis, or simply called as onion skinning. Starting with fibrinoid necrosis, here there is increased permeability of small vessels to fibrinogen and other plasma proteins, along with endothelial injury and platelet deposition, and all these contribute towards fibrinoid necrosis of arterioles and small arteries. And along with that, there is intravascular thrombosis. This intravascular thrombosis is again because of endothelial injury and platelet deposition, so therefore there will be intravascular thrombosis. Then second, more widely recognized lesion would be hyperplastic arteriosclerosis, or simply onion skinning. This is because of release of mitogenic factors from platelets, plasma and other cells, which lead to hyperplasia of intimal smooth muscle cells of vessels, which appear as concentric rings around the vessels, called as onion skinning or hyperplastic arteriosclerosis. Then this resultant ischemia, because of thickening of vessel wall, it elevates renin, which will further elevate angiotensin II, and this will further lead to renal vasoconstriction. So already the wall of the blood vessels, it is thickened. Now on top of that we have increased angiotensin II, which will further cause renal vasoconstriction, and this will worsen the renal ischemia which is already there, and this initiates a self perpetuating cycle. Next is gross appearance of benign and malignant nephrosclerosis. Uh, First of all, the size of the kidney. It will be normal or moderately reduced in size in benign nephrosclerosis, and it will be symmetrically and regularly contracted. This symmetrically regularly contracted term we have used many times. Similarly, malignant nephrosclerosis, if it is superimposed on a long-standing case of benign nephrosclerosis, then the size of the kidney, it will be reduced in size. But if it develops suddenly, then it will be slightly enlarged, and again it will be symmetrically and regularly contracted. Then appearance. In benign nephrosclerosis, the kidney, its surface, it will have a fine, even granularity which resembles the appearance of a grain leather. And this is because of cortical scarring, and these are called as V-shaped scars. And this gives rise to this leathery appearance of benign nephrosclerosis. In malignant nephrosclerosis, the term used is flea-bitten appearance, and this is because of small pinpoint hemorrhages that are seen on cortical surface, which again appear due to rupture of arterioles and capillaries. So on the right, we have these two gross pictures of benign nephrosclerosis and malignant nephrosclerosis for comparison. On the left, we have picture of benign nephrosclerosis, where we can see that the surface of kidney, it has this fine granular appearance, hence the term leathery appearance. Whereas on the right, we have the gross picture of malignant nephrosclerosis, where you can see these multiple pinpoint hemorrhages, hence the term flea-bitten appearance of kidney. Coming on to light microscopy appearance of benign nephrosclerosis. For the sake of simplicity, I have further divided the features into two types. One is primary changes and second is secondary changes. Primary changes are the ones which are limited to the vessels because that is where the primary lesion is, and secondary changes will be which will result because of the vascular changes. So starting with primary changes, first will be arterioles and small arteries. These show hyaline arteriolosclerosis, which is characterized by narrowing of lumen, which is again caused by thickening and hyalinization of the walls. And then larger sized vessels like interlobular and arcuate arteries. These show lesions which are called as fibroelastic hyperplasia, and these are because of medial hypertrophy and reduplication of elastic lamina, and along with increased myofibroblast in intima. So both these contribute towards development of fibroelastic hyperplasia, which again narrow the lumen. So two characteristic lesion involving the small arteries and arterioles called as hyaline arteriolosclerosis, and second one is which involves slightly larger arteries which are interlobular and arcuate ones. Because of that there is fibroelastic hyperplasia. So both these narrow the lumen, which in turn will compromise the renal blood supply, and that will affect the other components of kidney like glomeruli and tubules. So let's talk about these changes which are secondary to these vascular changes. So the surface granulation that we had talked about on gross appearance, they correspond microscopically to sclerotic glomeruli and tubular dropout. Then there will be foci of tubular atrophy and interstitial fibrosis. And because of decreased blood supply, there will be a variety of glomerular alterations like collapse of glomerular basement membrane. There will be deposition of collagen within Bowman space, then periglomerular fibrosis and total sclerosis of glomeruli. So all these changes they can be seen in the glomeruli. And in later stages, because of loss of sufficient amount of renal tissue, there will be features which are attributed to renal ablation. So again, we have discussed this many times that in renal conditions where there is sufficient loss of renal tissue, which is also called as renal ablation. So these secondary type of focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, this can also develop. So in this photomicrograph on the right, we have these small arterioles, which we can see that the lumen is very narrowed, and the wall, it is completely covered by this pink eosinophilic hyaline material, and it is, the wall is thickened. So this change that is marked in this photomicrograph, it is called as hyaline arteriolosclerosis. Next is the changes which are seen on malignant nephrosclerosis. So again, we will divide them into primary morphologic features, just like benign nephrosclerosis, and secondary morphologic features. Although you will not find these terms in the book, but these I have divided them just to make it simpler to remember. So the two characteristic lesions which are seen in malignant nephrosclerosis is fibrinoid necrosis and onion skinning. So starting with fibrinoid necrosis. So there will be fibrinoid necrosis of arterioles, which will again appear as bright eosinophilic granular change in blood vessel walls, which will stain positively for fibrin by special stains like periodic acid Schiff. And second characteristic change is onion skinning, which is also called as hyperplastic intimal sclerosis or hyperplastic arteriolitis. So this involves interlobular arteries and arterioles, and there is concentric layering of collagen along with proteoglycans and plasma proteins. And because of these concentric laminations, the term is given as onion skin appearance, because it appears as the peels of an onion on a cross section. Then other changes will be seen, and they will be similar to the ones which have seen in malignant in benign nephrosclerosis, which will be tubular atrophy, interstitial fibrosis, different variety of glomerular alterations, which again we have discussed. And in addition to that, there can be foci of infarction and necrosis, because this is malignant nephrosclerosis. So there will be vascular changes, they will be marked, and they will be at times sudden in development, which can lead to foci of infarction and necrosis. So these two photomicrographs on the right, we have on the top, this by this broad arrow, we have this afferent arteriole, which highlights fibrinoid necrosis, and the diagram or the picture on the lower, we have this onion skinning of a vessel, which is again marked by arrow. These line diagrams, they are from Hirschmohan, and they describe the salient microscopic features of benign and malignant nephrosclerosis. In benign nephrosclerosis, we can see that the glomeruli, they are completely sclerosed. Then the tubules, they are showing atrophy. There is some degree of interstitial fibrosis, and the primary lesions which are seen in the vessels, there is fibroelastic thickening of intima, although hyaline arteriolosclerosis is not depicted here, which also should be included whenever we are talking about benign nephrosclerosis. Similarly, on the right side, we have malignant nephrosclerosis. Here, if we talk about vascular lesion, two types. One is hyperplastic intimal sclerosis, or simply onion skinning, that we can see as these concentric proliferations of smooth muscles around the blood vessels. And along with that, we have fibrinoid necrosis of glomerular capillaries, as well as fibrinoid necrosis of a vessel. And again, the same changes in the other parts of the kidney or other components, like the tubules, they will show atrophy, and the glomeruli, in addition to fibrinoid necrosis, they can also show all the changes which will be seen in benign nephrosclerosis, like sclerosis and collapse of glomerular basement membrane, amongst others. So with this, we have covered tubulointerstitial diseases of kidney. And now we will talk about kidney tumors. Now these renal tumors, these have certain, as we will see in coming slides, that some of these tumors they tend to occur in children or young adults, whereas others they occur in adults. Then just like any other organ, there will be primary tumors and secondary tumors of kidney. Similarly, there will be benign tumors and malignant tumors, and there will be tumors that will arise from different components of kidney, like there will be some tumors that will arise from renal pelvis, whereas others they will arise from renal parenchyma. So starting with benign tumors, uh, where we have adenomas and oncocytomas in epithelial tumors of renal parenchyma, whereas in malignant tumors of epithelial type there will be adenocarcinoma kidney. Then there can be epithelial tumors of renal pelvis, where we have transitional cell papilloma or carcinoma. Then embryonal tumors. These tumors they tend to occur in children or young adults. So most of these they actually occur in very small children. So they will be like mesoblastic nephroma, multicystic nephroma, and Wilms tumor. Then non-epithelial tumors can be seen like angiomyolipoma, medullary interstitial tumor, and they can be miscellaneous tumors. And then final category is metastatic tumors. So we will mainly be talking about renal cell carcinoma and in very brief about Wilms tumor. Wilms tumor has already been discussed in pediatric tumors, so I will not discuss about it in much detail, but still because it is an important tumor, so I will just quickly go through it. So let's start with epithelial tumors of renal parenchyma. So the most common tumor amongst renal tumors is renal cell carcinoma, which is followed by Wilms tumor and urothelial tumors of calyces and pelvis. Starting with benign tumors, first is renal papillary adenoma. So this is a adenoma, so benign tumor, and it will be of papillary type. So grossly small, discrete, well circumscribed nodules, which is pale yellow in color, they are identified, and microscopically there will be complex branching papillomatous structures with complex fronds they will be seen. And as this is a benign tumor, so there will be no atypia, mitosis or necrosis or invasion of surrounding renal tissue. Then renal angiomyolipoma. This is a benign tumor which consists of three components. This is angiomyolipoma. So angio meaning vessels, myo smooth muscles, and lipoma adipose tissue. So it has three components, hence the term angiomyolipoma. So it is present in 25 to 50% of patients with tuberous sclerosis. So this is quite a substantial number. So it has a association with this particular syndrome called as tuberous sclerosis. And these tumors, they also have susceptibility to spontaneous hemorrhage because of their vascular component. So this tumor, it will have a variable mixture of these three components, which are vessels, smooth muscles, and adipose tissue, and it is associated with tuberous sclerosis. Then finally, we have oncocytoma. Like all other oncocytomas which occur in other organs, these tumors also grossly they are tan to mahogany brown in color. These are homogeneous and well circumscribed tumors because these are benign tumors. Microscopically, these will be comprised of oncocytes, which are these large eosinophilic cells, and they have benign appearing nuclei with prominent nucleoli. And ultrastructurally, these tumors, these are rich in mitochondria. Starting with malignant renal tumors, we will not be talking about a lot of them, but just a very few entities. One is renal cell carcinoma, which is the most common renal tumor, then Wilms tumor, and then urothelial carcinoma of renal pelvis. So starting with renal cell carcinoma, this represents nearly 2% of all newly diagnosed cancers in India, and median age at presentation is 52 years. So this is a tumor of late adulthood, and male to female ratio is 3.5 is to 1. So there is male predominance in these patients. It is also known by other names like hypernephroma and adenocarcinoma of the kidney. Hypernephroma was an old term which was used because of the resemblance of these tumor cells to clear cells of adrenal. As we will see in coming slides, as these tumors, they have clear cells. So that is why earlier this term hypernephroma, it was used for these tumors. Similarly, it is also called adenocarcinoma of kidney because the cell of origin is renal tubular epithelial cell. Then epidemiology, tobacco, it is the most significant risk factor. Then obesity, hypertension, unopposed estrogen therapy, then exposure to asbestos, petroleum products, and heavy metals. Also, chronic renal failure and acquired cystic disease patients on dialysis, all these also predispose to development of renal cell carcinoma. Now, genetics. Most of renal tumors, they are sporadic. However, approximately 4% of renal cell carcinomas, they occur as autosomal dominant familial cancers. So, because of due to study of these autosomal dominant familial cancers, it was found out that the genes that are involved in autosomal dominant familial cancers, these are also the ones which are involved in sporadic cancers. So, only difference was that in autosomal dominant familial cancers, there will be germline mutations, whereas in sporadic cancers, there will be sporadic mutations. But although, as we can see, these autosomal dominant familial cases, they contribute towards only 4% of these RCCs, but still they provided this useful information about the various genes that are involved in renal cell carcinoma, and whether it is autosomal dominant type or it is sporadic type, both types of the patients, they will have involvement of similar kind of genes. Only thing is that their method of inheritance, it will be different in these two age groups. And also some of these genes, they will be associated with characteristic histology, so as we will see. So let's start with familial cancers. One is von Hippel-Lindau syndrome. Half to two-thirds of these patients with VHL, they develop renal cysts and bilateral multiple renal cell carcinomas. Then another syndrome is hereditary familial clear cell carcinoma. It again involves VHL gene, but it does not have other manifestations of VHL syndrome. And then we have hereditary papillary carcinoma. Again, these patients, they have multiple bilateral papillary carcinomas with mutations of MET proto-oncogene. So the common theme amongst these is that there will be, if a cancer is familial, then usually they tend to be bilateral and they used to be multiple. Uh, so let's start with classification of renal cell carcinoma, which is based on cytogenetics, genetics, and along with if there is any particular attendant morphology. So clear cell carcinoma, this is the most common morphologic variant on microscopy, and this accounts for 70 to 80% cases of renal cell carcinoma. So amongst these clear cell type of renal cell carcinoma, 95% will be sporadic cases and approximately 5% they will be familial cases. And these cases, these are associated with mutations of VHL gene, which is, as we has discussed, that it is a tumor suppressor gene, and because of this there will be loss of sequences on short arm of chromosome 3, and there will be either deletion of 3p or there will be unbalanced chromosomal translocations like translocation 3, 6, 3, 8 or 3, 11. But basically the common denominator amongst these patients will be loss of short arm of chromosome 3 where this VHL gene is situated. So because of this loss of sequence which harbors this VHL gene, so depending upon whether it is sporadic or familial, but the common thing would be that there will be deletion or loss of the sequence which harbors this VHL gene, which is again located on the short arm of chromosome number 3. So second allele of this gene, it becomes inactivated by hypermethylation and somatic mutation. So what happens because of loss of this VHL gene? So starting with, if there is deletion of 3p or there is unbalanced translocation like 3,6, 3,8 or 3,11, so there will be loss of that particular sequence which harbors this VHL gene. Now, because of this VHL gene loss, what is its function? Its function is the loss of ubiquitin ligase complex, and this ubiquitin ligase complex is responsible for degradation of other proteins downstream. So because VHL gene is now lost or inactivated, so because of that it is unable to complete its function. So one of these proteins which were to be degraded but is now not degraded is hypoxia inducible factor 1. So this HIF1, it remains high in patients with these afflictions of VHL gene, and because of that, this hypoxia inducible 1 factor, it further upregulates these various proteins like VEGF, platelet derived growth factor, transforming growth factor alpha and beta. So all these contribute towards increased cell growth and angiogenesis, making these patients prone to development of RCC. Next is papillary carcinoma. These account for 10 to 15% of renal carcinomas. Just like clear cell carcinoma, they can be sporadic or familial cases. On morphology, there is papillary growth pattern. That is why the name papillary carcinoma. In genetics, there is involvement of MET proto-oncogene in familial cases, whereas in sporadic cases, only a proportion of the cases they will have involvement of this MET proto-oncogene. So other genetic abnormalities, they can also be detected in sporadic cases in addition to trisomy 7, which is the locus for MET gene. So familial cases, they will have trisomy 7, which is the locus for MET proto-oncogene, whereas in sporadic cases, there is trisomy 7 and in a proportion of cases, whereas others, they can have involvement of chromosome number 16, 17, and they can be loss of chromosome Y in male patients. So this MET proto-oncogene, it is a tyrosine kinase receptor for hepatocyte growth factor, and this mediates growth, cell mobility, and invasion. So because this MET proto-oncogene, it becomes constitutionally active in these patients, so it leads to uncontrolled cell growth, mobility, and invasion, all of these which favor uh, development of tumors in these patients. So just a quick recapitulation of these two prominent tumor types. So papillary carcinoma, it has involvement of MET proto-oncogene and it is located on chromosome number 7 and it is associated with papillary histology. Whereas clear cell carcinoma, it has involvement of VHL gene, which is a tumor suppressor gene. It is located on chromosome number 3 and it has a clear cell morphology. So these two were the main important types or the common ones. There are other less common types like chromophobe renal cell carcinoma. These account for 5% of renal cell carcinomas, and microscopically there is presence of cells with prominent cell membranes and pale eosinophilic cytoplasm, hence the name chromophobe. Genetically, these patients, they can have multiple chromosome losses and extreme hypodiploidy, and these patients, they have excellent prognosis. Then other is succinate dehydrogenase deficient RCC. Here there is loss of expression of SDH gene due to germline mutations. And morphologically, these have flocculent cytoplasmic vacuoles and there will be areas of low nuclear grade. And finally, we have collecting duct carcinomas. These account for 1% or even less than that of RCCs, and these arise from collecting ducts in medulla, and the nests of tumor cells, they are found in fibrotic stroma. And genetics, again, there can be several chromosome losses and deletions they are described, although no definite pattern has been identified, as in the case of clear cell carcinoma and papillary carcinoma. So the two most importantly identified or well-defined cases of renal cell carcinoma, they are clear cell carcinoma, which is associated with VHL gene located on chromosome number 3, and second one is papillary carcinoma, which has involvement of MET proto-oncogene, which is located on chromosome number 7. And in addition to that, we have these less common types like chromophobe renal cell carcinoma, succinate dehydrogenase deficient RCC, and collecting duct carcinoma. So this is a diagrammatic representation of cytogenetics of clear cell carcinoma and papillary carcinoma. On the left, we have on the top we have sporadic papillary carcinoma where there can be trisomy 7, and in addition to that there can be trisomy 17 or loss of chromosome number Y in male patients, and this leads to mutation or activation of MET proto-oncogene. Whereas in hereditary papillary carcinomas, there is trisomy 7, which again involves the same gene. Then on the right, we have clear cell carcinoma, where there is deletion of chromosome 3, which is the location of this gene VHL, which is located on short arm of chromosome 3. And the second allele is inactivated or because of mutation or hypermethylation. So these are the uh, basic cytogenetic defects which are involved in clear cell carcinoma and papillary carcinoma. Also, we can see that in sporadic types, they have made just one tumor because these tumors usually there is a presence of a single tumor in sporadic type. Whereas if the tumor is of a hereditary type, then usually these will be multifocal and they tend to be bilateral. Starting with morphology of renal cell carcinoma, these tumors they tend to affect the poles of the kidney rather than the midsection of kidney. Usually these are single masses and they tend to involve one side, only one kidney. And however, exception to this is papillary carcinoma, which tend to be multifocal, and familial cases, which again tend to be multifocal and bilateral. So these masses, these are spherical and bright yellow on cut section to gray white in color, and they tend to distort the renal outline. That is, they do not follow the reniform shape of kidney. Now this yellow color on gross is due to lipid accumulation in the cells of this tumor, and many of these tumors they will have a variegated appearance, meaning there will be a mixture of multiple colors, and this is because of areas of necrosis, cystic change and hemorrhage which occur in these tumors. Margins are usually sharp, that is they are well delineated from the surrounding renal tissue. Papillary carcinoma, as we have discussed just now, that these are bilateral, they tend to be multifocal, and they are typically hemorrhagic and cystic, and it is the most common tumor that occurs in dialysis associated cystic disease of kidney. Now these tumors they also can extend into calyces and ureters, and characteristically they involve the renal vein contiguously, and so much so that they can reach the inferior vena cava and right side of the heart as well in some cases. So this is a very characteristic feature of this tumor, that is it tends to involve the renal vein contiguously. So we have these two pictures, both are of renal cell carcinoma gross appearance. We can see that there is a tumor mass in both of these pictures on the upper pole of kidney, and it is well circumscribed from the rest of the normal renal parenchyma, and also it is projecting out of the renal outline, meaning it does not follow the renal outline, and it has this on the tumor on the left it has a yellowish appearance, it has kind of lobulated, whereas the tumor on the right we can see that it has multiple nodules and they have this variegated appearance because of these black areas. These are areas of hemorrhage, and also we can appreciate some areas of necrosis. Similarly, in the tumor on the left, there is this white arrow which is pointing at the tumor which is present in the renal vein, again highlighting the very characteristic feature of this tumor, which is its tendency to involve the renal vein contiguously. And on the right, we can see this tumor, it is multifocal. There is one tumor, the larger one at the upper pole, and along with that, there is another tumor at the lower end. So all these features they highlight the common features of this renal cell carcinoma, that is usually it involves the poles of the kidney, as in both of these pictures it is involving one of the poles of the kidney. It also tends to involve the renal vein, and it can be at times multifocal and bilateral, and also they have this yellowish appearance because of its lipid content, and because of superadded necrosis and cystic change and hemorrhage they can have variegated appearance. Then light microscopy appearance, as we had discussed that there are multiple types of light microscopy appearance of renal cell carcinoma. So we will discuss them one by one. First is clear cell carcinoma type of RCC. This is the most common variant of RCC, and here if we talk about the pattern or arrangement of cells, so the cells they are arranged in solid sheets to trabeculae or cords, and these tubules or sheets, these are separated by delicate vascular septae. Now the cell appearance, the cells they are round to polygonal in shape, and cytoplasm is abundant and clear because it's clear cell carcinoma. So this is because of the clear appearance of these cells, and this clear appearance is because of accumulation of intracellular lipid and glycogen. And at times they can have granular cytoplasm, but mostly the characteristic appearance will be of clear cell type. And nuclei, they can be low grade to extremely bizarre type depending upon the grade of the tumor. Then second subtype is papillary RCC. Here the pattern or arrangement of cells will be papillae. And these papillae, what is characteristic about these papillae is that the cores of these papillae, they will be filled with foam cells. The cells which line these papillae, they tend to be cuboidal to low columnar in shape, and these cells, these are the tumor cells, whereas foam cells, these are the non-tumor cells. Then nuclei can be further divided again in two types, depending upon which type of genetic mutation is there. These are further divided into type 1 papillary RCC, where there is presence of MET proto-oncogene. Here the nuclei, they will be low grade and cytoplasm will be scant and basophilic, and these patients, they have a good prognosis. Whereas in type 2 papillary RCC, there is presence of germline mutations of fumarate hydratase, and these cases, they have high grade nuclear features. Cytoplasm is abundant and eosinophilic, and these patients tend to have poor prognosis. So on the right, we have this photomicrograph of papillary carcinoma. So we can see these multiple papillae which are filled with these light eosinophilic cells which are foam cells, and lining these papillae we have these short cuboidal cells which are the tumor cells. Then next is chromophobe RCC. This tumor is arranged in sheets, and the cells they have polygonal to round shape. Nuclei, they have very characteristic appearance of presence of halo around the nuclei, and cytoplasmic pale eosinophilic in color. Then final is collecting duct carcinoma. It is a rare variant, and there will be presence of irregular channels of cells which will be lying in fibrous stroma, and cells they are usually of very high nuclear grade. So on the right, we have this photomicrograph of chromophobe renal cell carcinoma. We can see that there are these clear spaces around the nuclei, and it is a very characteristic feature to identify chromophobe RCC, and we can see that the cytoplasm, it is pale eosinophilic in color. This slide shows the comparative light microscopic features of clear cell RCC, papillary RCC, and chromophobe RCC. On the left side, we have clear cell RCC, where the cells they are arranged in sheets or trabeculae, and they are separated by fine vascular septae. The cells they have well-defined cell borders, and they have abundant clear cytoplasm. In the right upper corner, or in picture B, we have papillary RCC. Here we can see multiple papillae which are filled with these large light eosinophilic foam cells, and these papillae they are lined by flat or low cuboidal cells. And in the right lower corner we have chromophobe RCC, where we can see that these cells they have pale eosinophilic cytoplasm, and their nuclei they are surrounded by prominent perinuclear halos. So amongst these three, the most common pattern that you will get to see will be of clear cell RCC type. Starting with the clinical features of RCC, the classical diagnostic triad that is described in these patients is of costovertebral pain, palpable abdominal mass, and hematuria. The most reliable amongst these three is presence of hematuria. Although this triad is present in only 10% of the patients, still it is useful when it is present. Then symptoms and signs of RCC, they can be further divided into those due to tumor proper, then constitutional symptoms, then due to paraneoplastic syndromes that are associated with RCC, and then finally due to metastatic deposits of RCC. So the symptoms or signs which can be due to tumor proper, they can be costovertebral pain, hematuria, which can be microscopic or macroscopic, and presence of or feeling of abdominal heaviness by the patient, and on clinical examination by presence of an abdominal palpable mass. Then constitutional symptoms can be in the form of fever, malaise, weakness, and weight loss. Then features can be due to various paraneoplastic syndromes that are associated with RCC. Then finally, features due to metastatic deposits. RCC, they have the tendency to metastasize even before presenting with the local symptoms at the site of development. So as many as 25% of the patients, they will present with symptoms at the time of presentation, which will be associated because of metastasis. The common sites of metastasis are lungs, bones, regional lymph nodes, liver, adrenal, and brain. Then paraneoplastic syndromes in RCC. There can be numerous paraneoplastic syndromes that can be associated with RCC due to expression of various proteins or hormones by this tumor. For example, the patients can have polycythemia. This is because of overexpression of erythropoietin. Then hypercalcemia because of release of parathyroid hormone-like substance and prostaglandins. Then hypertension because of renin. Then feminization or masculinization syndrome because of expression of gonadotropins, Cushing syndromes because of glucocorticoids, and eosinophilia, leukemoid reaction, and amyloidosis can also be observed in these patients. Next is Wilms tumor, which is also called as nephroblastoma. This is an embryonic tumor which is derived from primitive renal epithelial and mesenchymal components. This is the most common abdominal malignant tumor of young children, and age of presentation is 1 to 6 years with male to female ratio of 1 is to 1. Genetics, both sporadic and inherited forms are identified. Those sporadic forms are much more common. Gene involved is loss of function mutation of WT1 gene, which is located on short arm of chromosome 11. This is a transcriptional activator of renal and gonadal differentiation, and it regulates mesenchyme to epithelial transition in kidney. So, as this gene is responsible for differentiation and maturation of epithelial components and mesenchymal components, therefore, it leads to presence of this embryonic tumor, where we will see that primitive epithelial and mesenchymal components, they will be identified. In addition to these, there are three distinct syndromes which are associated with Wilms tumor. Although these tumors, these syndromes, these are very well defined, but still these are extremely rare, and only a very small percentage of patients with Wilms tumor are likely to be associated with these tumors. But whenever they are there, so it helps in identification and uh, for screening of these patients for development of Wilms tumor. These can be VAGR, which is an acronym which translates into Wilms tumor, aniridia, genitourinary abnormalities, and mental retardation. Another two syndromes are Dennis-Drash syndrome and Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome. Then a word about nephrogenic RES. These are putative precursor lesions of Wilms tumor, and these are identified in renal parenchyma, which is adjacent to Wilms tumor. Two types of nephrogenic RES they have been described. One are hyperplastic and second are sclerotic. Hyperplastics, they resemble just like the Wilms tumor proper, and sclerotic nephrogenic RES, these are composed of fibrous tissue with admixed immature tubules and glomeruli. Starting with morphology of Wilms tumor, grossly the tumor would be large, solitary, and well circumscribed mass. 10% can be bilateral or multifocal, and on cut section, these tumors are tan to gray homogeneous tumor with occasional foci of hemorrhage, cyst formation, and necrosis. Then coming on to microscopic appearance of Wilms tumor. In microscopy, attempts to recapitulate different stages of nephrogenesis, they are identified as it is an embryonic tumor. So the various immature components of kidney or nephrogenesis, they are identified and they try to mature. So the classic triphasic picture is of three components that are seen in a Wilms tumor. These are blastemal component, stromal component, and epithelial component. So, what is this appearance of these different components? Blastema, it looks like sheets of small blue cells with scant cytoplasm, almost resembling lymphocytes. Then there is stroma, which can be of fibroblastic type or myxoid type. And finally, there can be epithelial component, which can be in the form of immature tubules and glomeruli, which try to mature. So, this photomicrograph on the right, I have highlighted this blastema, which are these small blue cells with scant cytoplasm with red asterisks. Stroma is highlighted by these black asterisks both on right upper and right lower corner. And the tubules, they are or epithelial component, it is highlighted by these yellow circles. So these are the three triphasic components of Wilms tumor, which is blastema, comprising of small blue cells, stroma, which is of fibroblastic or myxoid type, and epithelial component, which comprises of abortive tubules and glomeruli. In addition to that, sometimes we can also find heterogeneous components which are not a part of normal nephrogenesis. These can be squamous, cartilaginous, osteoid, or adipose tissue. Also, at times we can find smooth muscle. Now, 5% of these tumors, they can have some areas of anaplasia. Here we will find large hyperchromatic pleomorphic cells and abnormal mitosis can be identified, and this corresponds with P53 mutations, and these patients, they carry worse prognosis. In the photomicrograph on the right, you can see a bizarre mitotic figure which is highlighted by this yellow colored arrow. Then last is urothelial carcinoma of renal pelvis. This will be dealt with in more detail when we discuss lower genitourinary tract and male reproductive system. So for now, I will discuss it in very brief. So these carcinomas, they comprise 5 to 10% of primary renal tumors, and these arise from urothelial lining of renal pelvis. Their benign counterpart is papilloma and malignant is urothelial carcinoma. Presentation, these tumors, they have early presentation with hematuria or with symptoms of blockage of urinary outflow related symptoms. Patients with analgesic nephropathy and Balkan nephropathy, these patients, they have increased incidence of urothelial carcinoma of renal pelvis. Just a word about Balkan nephropathy. This is a kind of endemic nephropathy that involves the people who are living in the region which is along the Danube River, and this is because of aristolochic acid. This particular compound, it is derived from weed which contaminates the flour which is consumed by the people living in this belt. This leads to kind of renal damage in these patients which slowly progresses over a period of time, and these patients are also prone to develop urothelial carcinomas of renal pelvis. Coming on to morphology of these tumors, grossly these tumors, they can be papillary, flat or nodular masses of variable size, and papillary tumors are in particular prone to be friable, and papillae can also be identified grossly. Microscopically, a complete spectrum of tumors is identified, starting with carcinoma in situ at one end and high-grade papillary urothelial carcinoma at the other end. In between, we have punlump or papillary urothelial neoplasm of low malignant potential and low-grade papillary urothelial carcinoma. Starting with microscopic appearance of low-grade papillary urothelial carcinoma, they have appearance which recapitulates urothelial lining. So here we will see papillae with fibrovascular cores which are lined by thickened urothelial epithelium, and occasional mitotic figures they are identified. So on the right we have this picture of low-grade papillary urothelial carcinoma, where we can see that in the right lower corner there is a fibrovascular core which is lined by multiple layers of urothelial epithelium. Also we can identify few mitotic figures which have been pointed out by these arrows. Next is high-grade papillary urothelial carcinoma. These are high-grade tumors. Architecture, there will be marked cellular disarray as compared to low-grade papillary urothelial carcinomas, which are more orderly. Cellular features, these tumors, they have marked anaplasia in the form of pleomorphism, hyperchromasia, and frequent mitotic figures, they can be identified. Frequently, these tumors they invade muscularis propria with direct and distant spread of these tumors. So on the right, we have a photomicrograph of papillary urothelial carcinoma of high-grade type. We can see that there is marked nuclear disarray and there is marked degree of nuclear pleomorphism and hyperchromasia of tumor cells. So with this, we complete our lecture series on excretory system. Also, do find some time to listen to some songs by Pink Floyd. You may thank me for it later.